Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Certified Forgotten. We are the internet's horror film podcast that talks about films with 10 or fewer reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. This is an on week. It means that this is a week where you're getting a 1 hour episode with a very, very special guest. But before we talk about our special guest, you should meet my not so special co-host. It's Matt Donato. How are you doing? I don't know why I did the drive-by there.
The fuck?
I know.
What was that?
I was on a plane all day yesterday. I'm feeling punchy.
I get that. No, I understand. I get cranky after long flights too. I will be on many flights in the coming fall, so you're gonna have to deal with a lot of my negativity.
Fair enough. Then you can get me back in those episodes. But hey, you all remember how this works. Our credo, our catchphrase, our mission statement, our manifesto is that some films are certified fresh, some films are certified rotten. Our films are certified forgotten. We talk about some movies that maybe you saw, maybe you didn't see, but I guarantee you haven't thought about in a long time, if at all. And today's movie is a really, really great example of that. We're going to get into that in a little bit. But Donato, I'm sorry. I did a drive-by, man. I'm glad to be co-hosting this episode with you, and I would love it if you would introduce our very cool guest.
Only this episode? Wait, now you only want to co-host one single episode with me more before you replace me? I don't know what's going on here, Monagle.
That's fine. Maybe this episode might go so well. I just might ask our guest to come and be the co-host. So you never know, bud.
All right, well then let's bring our guest in to give them the chance to replace me in Highlander status. There will be no fighting. It is just a podcast. In any case, it's always nice when we can cross someone off our we really want to have them on the podcast list and we just can't make it work for a while list. And that is happening today. So we are very happy to have Adam Cesare, the author of Clown in a Cornfield 3, The Church of Friendo, and also many other wonderful things. Adam, thank you.
Hey, thanks for having me on, guys. And it's not like that I'm that like hard to pin down. I'm not like a prima donna with this crazy schedule. It's that your format's a little intimidating. As a movie guy, like I'll think of movies and I'll be like, oh, and now I have to. I'm not like a Rotten Tomatoes person, so I have to like go check. And Monagle had emailed this time, and because you emailed a couple times, and every time I'll sit there for 15 minutes, try to brainstorm something, and I had just watched the movie we're going to talk about. I had just watched Bruiser, and I was like, I bet Bruiser. It's like the perfect amount of time. It's 2000. There wasn't that much internet thing. You know, it was like a movie that I think of as like a previously viewed at Blockbuster type movie. And I just was like, that's got to be it. It's got to be perfect. And like, I think 5 minutes after you had emailed, I was like, let's do it. Let's make it happen. This is the time, because I actually have a choice that I can talk for an hour about Bruiser. I don't know about you guys, but I could for sure talk for an hour about Romero and stuff. So,
well, and it's also always interesting to me. Like, obviously, we'll get into your story and all that stuff, but really quickly about the topic and about picking movies. It is funny when I look back and I go, "Oh, like it's a George Romero movie." And I know it was the 2000s. I know it was in that time when it maybe got lost in some shuffles. But like, even I was a little surprised because the amount of horror critics that have gotten onto the platform at this point on Rotten Tomatoes, they've stared like uploading all of those reviews,
like
now.
Going back.
Yeah, go back.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm curious. I always love when it works out like that.
Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah, I was very excited to talk to you guys.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your relationship to the genre, Adam. I've been wanting to have you on the show forever. We were talking about this during the pre-show. It's because you and I didn't start writing. I started writing, and you were in the middle of writing for a little magazine. Rest in peace, Paris Cinema magazine back in the day. Yeah, I remember reading your stuff when I first moved to New York. I grabbed a copy of one of your early books, the one where like the meteor lands in the Long Island neighborhood, which I had a lot of fun with.
Yep.
And so
video night.
Video night. Thank you. So there's a lot we're going to talk about with regards to the kind of the many, many, many hats you've worn in the industry. But let's go all the way back to the beginning and talk about where your love of the horror genre started. Was there a particular movie, TV show, book experience that really stands out for you?
I grew up in a household where my parents like really prized like reading, and really like my dad had a stack of books, and he had like a lot of Michael Crichton and stuff like that, but he had a lot of King too. And so I always kind of remember those. And then at the same time, this is all like pre-watching or reading any of this stuff, like going to the supermarket with my mom, and there was a video rental section in the supermarket, which was like a little, built in, and just passing the horror section, that tiny, like it was like 3 shelves horror section, just being so scared, but being so drawn to those covers. And my dad is a huge movie guy, and he would constantly, especially when grade school and stuff like that, he would always be like, what are they going to do? Like, they're not even learning fractions yet. I'm going to take them out. So he would like just take me out of school and we would go see the movies. Like we'd go see matinees. This is all to say he's not a horror guy. Like it's kind of the interesting thing about that is like his film fandom is everything, almost like everything but horror. And I feel like growing up, because I was always attracted to that section of the video store, it got to be something I could do with my dad and like, relate to him in a way, but also have my own thing, because it's like, well, that, what my actual area of expertise and the thing that I like most is the thing that is the area where you have the least expertise. And I think that's, that's the best I can do to like, an origin story type thing. Cause we all know it's like a million things, unless people have like that one real like lightning strike moment of one real movie. For me, it was a lot of things. Like for me, it was a lot of different things.
I'm not gonna lie, Adam. Most people do. Most of the time, when we ask people that question, they have kind of like there was this one movie, this one late night kind of thing. I'd say that's the vast majority. I feel like your experience is a little bit more authentic. I feel like there's probably a little bit of revisionist history when it comes to being like, I watched a lot of horror movies and I've decided that this was the one. But it is interesting for somebody to talk about like a million little things, because I do think that that's probably the way it goes more often than not.
Yeah, and what's funny is like when I try to think of like, oh, do I have like a lightning strike thing? I can think of like seeing Halloween real early. I can think of seeing Aliens instead of not Alien real early. Like I had a tape. My uncle was notorious for like duping tapes, and he would like use long play and put like multiple movies on a tape. So he gave me Jaws and Aliens together, like on like the same tape, and I would like rewatch that. Like, so it's like I can think of movies, but the tape that I think of most was I got from like a garage sale, and it was, I think it's called. I actually have like a VHS Preservation Society like dupe of it. It's like maybe Monster Mania or something like that, and it's not a movie; it's a trailer reel. And it had a million different trailers in it. So maybe that's where that like a million little things comes from, because I actually watched that trailer collection all the time. And interestingly, one of the I think the scariest trailer on that trailer collection was for Night of the Living Dead. The voiceover trailer, the very like the very scary voiceover. It shows you that when Barbara comes up over the stairs and sees the face with all the goo on it and stuff like that really scared me. Nothing else on that tape scared me, because it was all just kind of monster movies and like goofy stuff. And Ray Harryhausen, they padded out the tape by putting like a kind of like extended behind the scenes trailer for like the 7 Voyages of Sinbad, which is like, okay, that's not really, this is supposed to be a hard tape, but it was just this Good Times Rhino collection of like, let's put something out on tape to move a unit. But I really, that for me, like maybe that's the movie, maybe that's the lightning strike thing, is just having that tape. But I think the more, like you said, honest answer is probably it was a lot of different things that led me to liking the genre I like.
Yeah, I like thinking about the revisionist history that you just mentioned, Monocle, because like as you said that, I went back in my mind very quickly, because Record is that movie that I like to use as an example of when I became a hardcore horror fan, and like that was still early college for me, because I'm renting it through Netflix, and Record is an amazing film. But the more I think about it, like I had to get there somehow. I wasn't just going from watching like Anchorman to Record. Like there had to be some horror fandom in me already. So now like I am gonna like think about where did that start farther back, because movies like Feast, I think, were some of my comfort horror movies even before that, and yada yada yada. Yeah, I gotta think about that. I never thought about the revisionist history.
The Netflix thing is you had to. It's the browse function on Netflix. I do remember it. Actually, the browse function was actually pretty good. They fed you a lot of stuff through there, but it's like you still had to click on the little thumbnail for Record and use one of your picks, because I think you had like they had different plans, and you had 1 or 2 or 3, and it was like you had to burn a pick on it. Like so you had to had a pretty good idea that you wanted to see it.
I like that. I got to think about that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Donato. I feel like I just sparked an existential crisis on a Tuesday night.
No, but it's a podcast thing. It's like you go on a podcast, and it's a promotional thing. Like I'm sure I've done it. I'm sure there's podcasts where I'm like, it was Halloween, like especially when I'm talking on a book podcast, and it's like they don't want to hear every little movie. When I'm talking to movie guys, it's a little different. It's a little bit okay, I can movie it up. Like when you're talking like on a YA fiction podcast where you like, oh, it's the spooky authors on. It's like you kind of just got to play the hits a little bit. And I know what you're talking about, because I've heard those like podcast interviews where like the story's almost too good to be true. It turns into
Mhm.
like the, it's your cousin Marvin Berry. Like they have like that, or like it's like they didn't like not everyone had this like fallen radioactive acid, transformation into a Harhound. Like,
Well, I want to ask a little bit about I think of you. You can say fairly or unfairly, but like, I know from knowing you online for a few years, I know from watching your TikToks and the type of videos and stuff that you focus on when you're making your own content. I think of you as sort of like an extreme horror guy. You've written in the extreme horror genre. You talk a lot about like 80s and 90s movies that sort of fall under that. Um, of course, you're just like the most easygoing and friendly guy, which weirdly feels appropriate. A lot of the extreme horror aficionados I know are just like super bubbly. Is that something that you found within the genre at any point, like high school or afterwards? Did you find yourself gravitating towards the stuff that was a little bit more than the horror that everybody else knew?
I think there's something to that, and I think there's something. I think my tastes have changed a little bit, and like the way that I position myself to change a little bit, just because I'm a young adult author. Like
Yes.
I'm like the extreme guy of the young adult author, but that's like, I'm edgy Mr. Rogers. Like, I'm still like I'm not like I think when I first got into writing fiction, and around the same time that I was writing film articles for Paris Cinema, I was kind of in the indie horror scene, and there was a lot of extreme horror. And I was when I first got into like maybe toying with the idea of like I can try to write, saleable fiction, was college, when I was reading a lot of, it was the last gasp of leisure books, when you could still get those mass market paperbacks in Borders right before Borders closed, and then in Barnes and Noble. So it was a lot of like Jack Ketchum's backlist and a lot of Edward Lee, like his more commercial stuff, which is still pretty extreme. I was reading a lot of that stuff, and I was kind of talking with these guys. Like my first book ever published, second book I wrote, was edited by John Skip and Craig Spector. They'd written The Bridge and a number of like splatterpunk classics. They were like two of the original splatterpunks. They co-wrote the first version of Dream Child, Nightmare on Elm Street 5. So they're these 80s splatterpunk horror guys, and I was just kind of in that scene. And a lot of the early books I wrote are very Frank Henenlottery. They're very that book that Skip had published is called Tribesmen, and it's got a lot of Deodato in it. It's like a riff on like Cannibal Holocaust if it took place on like the Lost Island, the island from Lost. So it's like it's this. I guess I'd always kind of liked the more extreme stuff. I think that's changed now, and especially on, speaking of TikTok, I think there's this groundswell, and I don't even know if like the general reader, especially because these books aren't in like Barnes and Nobles and stuff like that, is so much aware of it. But there's like these guys like Aaron Beauregard and Chris Triana, and a lot of other more Judith Sonnet, a lot of other more extreme authors that like go way, way, way far with extreme, like Serbian film territory, which is great and is stuff that I enjoy reading. But as at the same time, my career's kind of gone another way. I've become like what I like to see as like a gateway horror guy. I'm constantly like, I've been, for the last few nights to promote the new book, I've been like going live on TikTok, which is something 2 years ago I don't think you ever would have caught me doing. But I'm talking to school librarians and teachers and parents that are like, oh, my kid loves your book, which is like a really fulfilling thing. But it's not like, you know what I mean? Like that like the edges have sanded off me, but I'm just into slightly different stuff now. But at the same time I say that, I'm like stacking up rejections on my new book that I've just gone out with my agent, who's like, every rejection is like, love Adam, love the writing, it's too gross, like which is like, it's great, it's kind of like a badge of honor, but I'd rather they buy the book.
Well, let me ask you about that, because I think that's something that people that are not too into the writing scene or any kind of creative writing, whether it's screenplays or scripts or something, you sort of assume that you're the same person throughout, right? Like Scorsese's been making the same kinds of movies for 50 years. And so like Scorsese at 30, Scorsese at 70 it's still sort of like the same energy.
Yeah.
But you're talking about your own journey, which is, the first time when I sat down to read Clown in a Cornfield, I was like, I want to support my boy. I really like Adam. I was like, wow, this is so different than Video Night and some of the other type of stuff that I've seen you talking about and had written before. But it felt like such a lock-in moment for you. It really, like the first time I read Clown in the
Thank you.
Cornfield, I was like, this guy has absolutely found his niche, his voice, the thing he can do really well. So what does it feel like to like have your writing style, the thing that you're interested in doing, evolve like that?
It's an iterative process. Like, I think Video Night was the first. I wrote the first draft of Video Night before I could legally drink. Like I'm, they say that every cell in your body is replaced every 7 years, kind of thing. Like, I'm like two different people than I was like when I wrote that book. And it's just, I think it's a mix of getting better, and it's a mix of getting more comfortable in your kind of skin. And then for Clown in the Cornfield, it's the very deliberate change of audience. I think I know I'm writing for a different person, or at least, even though I've had readers that have followed me throughout and have kind of vibed with the changes, which is awesome. We wouldn't be talking about part 3 if I didn't have those people, you know what I mean?
Right,
like bolstering the line. But you also, it's a change of perspective of like, well, I was a teacher for 5 years. I was like, I'm writing for the kids I was seeing every day. You know what I mean? Like, I'm writing for the students in my class, and what would they like to see, and what would they understand, in a way. I think one of the more interesting things about writing the Clown in the Cornfield books was like editorial, like conference calls, and the idea of like talking with people who are not big horror people, constantly using references like, oh, should be like Scream. And then you kind of have to talk, like, at least from my perspective, it's like, well, no, it shouldn't be like Scream in maybe the ways you guys are thinking, because that relies on a prior knowledge. I want to write this as if it's the first horror thing you're ingesting. Like, I want to catch kids that are just having that moment where they pass it in the bookstore, kind of like I had when I was passing those movies in the video store. Is like, what is that? That seems a little different. I don't want to assume any kind of prior knowledge. So it's meant to be your first slasher, but just as enjoyable if it's your 101st kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then there's that, like you said, lock in of, oh, this is like Big Five publishing. This is very different than, having one editor look through it that's also the copy editor, that's also maybe, just gonna make the Mobi file themselves to like send off to Amazon to have like printed POD. Like, it's like, I love indie publishing, but there's a lot less steps, and it's going through a lot less hands, and it's a lot less of a processed product. You know what I'm talking about? Like, so like, I think part of that is just, okay, get your head in the game, Adam. Like, it's put me in coach time, I think is written all over the first book. And in a way that I think the second and the third book are better. And I think Influencer, which is another YA book that I've had that has come out since then, I think all 3 of those books are better than Clown in the Cornfield, because I think, if anything, Clown in the Cornfield suffers a little too much from, it's my big shot, when I read it, I can almost read that in it. And I don't want to discount anyone's experience, because a lot of people are like, no, the first one's the best one, and then but which is fine. But to me, that's what I see in it. And I think the other stuff now that I've written 3 or 4 young adult books has feels a lot easier now. It feels like a lot, I can lean back and get a little bit easier into it.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that shout out to, as somebody who's married to somebody in publishing, right? My wife is a production editor for Dutton. Like, shout out to all the people that are never seen that makes a book happen. I'm glad to hear you kind of shout all those folks out, because I know that the work that goes into it, and those aren't the people that are necessarily the ones shaping that first pass of the book. But
it's not even like you think of like an editor. Like, I think people who aren't in the industry think of like, oh, well, the editor does. It's like, no. Like, my editor, who may be listening and is lovely, I don't think he didn't catch any of like the big continuity stuff in like 2 and 3. That was someone more, like that was different developmental stages editors who are just as, if not more important than the editor that brings it in, which there's different roles though too. It's a stratified, weird system that has been going for longer than there's been movies. You know what I mean? It's like this. It's like the idea of publishing houses and how these things are structured is like is good in a way, because it's tried and true, but it's also bad in a lot of ways, because you're like, well, why does it take like 6 approvals to get like this one, this one thing, and it's like, this is how we've always done it, like it's
Yeah.
okay.
It's also because your character walked out of a room, and then in the next page they walked out of the room again. And
Yeah,
stuff like
exactly.
that.
Yeah, which again, you get saved so many different times in so many different ways, because I'm a very tired man and I make a lot of mistakes.
I hear you. Donato.
Yeah, I have a question because we've had C. Robert Cargill on the show, and I feel like you have joined an illustrious club in the sense that you have written journalism for Paracinema. You have written, obviously, many books, so you are a published author, and you are also dabbling in screenplays now. You have screenplays to your name. So I feel like you have different modes of writing, and that is my assumption, obviously, as only a journalist, that is probably pretty hard. And I guess the question, we posted to Cargill and he had kind of a rundown of answers and how he goes about it. But like from your professional experience, let's say, how hard was it to kind of bounce between those mediums and those modes of writing? And like what lessons did you learn going from one to the other? And how do I segment myself as a writer in different buckets?
It's interesting because I think they've all the lessons you learn in each enhance the other ones. And it's not to say that it's like all the same, because it's very much not all the same. It's like they're such different disciplines. But I think when I was writing for Paracinema, I was still a college student, and I think the edits I would get back from Christine that would be like, you only need 3 words to say what you said in 11. Was big stuff to me. Made me do better in my papers at school. It was wild foundational stuff that probably should have happened in English class in 10th grade. I was learning through quote unquote journalism. I don't know. I was writing about movies that were 50 years old, but at that point, so it was I don't know how hot to the press as it was journalism wise, but it was it was film writing and criticism in a way. So I think that helped me into just a very no, doofus, you could do it. You should be a better writer than this. That helped me that way. And then at the same time, I was a film student, so I was writing scripts for classes, and I was writing screenplays, thinking, oh, this might be the thing. And then as I kind of approached the end of college, I looked at what it took to be a screenwriter and how hard it was, and the fact that you might have to relocate to LA, which I think is all you have a lot of professors telling you that. It's I don't want to do that. I don't want to do and it was a little bit of a come to Jesus moment of wow, I always kind of thought, growing up, I was I always kind of thought I'd want to make movies. And I guess I don't. I guess I really don't. The mix of not of loving screenwriting, but not liking the minutia around it, and the what it takes to do it. And then the idea of taking production classes and really knowing well, I'm not going to be a film professional in any other capacity but a writer, because I don't have the chops. And by chops, I mean I'm not good at talking to other film people, professionals on any kind of set. I don't. I think it's knowing that about yourself. So I learned a lot about myself through this very expensive process, and was well, what the hell do I do? And I think it was well, in the meantime, I have a lot of English credits because I like reading books. Let me teach because I have plenty of friends who are teachers. It must be a great job. Teaching is hard. It's like a meat grinder. It was killing me. I was coming home crying every day, and at the same time I was writing books, and I was I'm gonna write my way out of this, which seems like a really dramatic way of putting it, just as we were saying before about the mythologizing for podcasts. But that one's true. That one's I was literally coming home having mental breakdowns because the job was so hard. It's teaching is have you taught? It's
I have not. No,
I'll tell you what I did.
Yeah,
maybe this will relate to you. I was unemployed my first year after college, and I taught one. It was a latchkey program. I taught one film studies thing to middle to 6th graders for 2 months, during the summer or whatever, at the beginning of the school year. And I have never had my ability to do anything tested as hard as that group of students tested. I was just there to be what do you look at a shot? What do you think is interesting in a shot? Fresh off my, my undergraduate communication degree with an emphasis in film studies, I was I'm going to pass the passion along. All they wanted to do was talk about whatever trailer they'd seen on YouTube the day before. And it was and that they were smart kids. Don't get me wrong, they were smart kids.
No one's
but
gonna rock your shit like sixth graders, though.
They
Like,
had nothing was sacred. None of this meant anything to them. I had to make it mean something to them. It was rough.
Well, it's valiant that you tried, and that's a cool thing. But it's like what I call teaching was like, you have like 4 periods a day that are the same, and then like 1 or 2 like electives that aren't. So it's like doing 6 stand-up sets. That like, if you're bombing, you can't just go home and it's not an open mic. Like it's like you're doing like all these like, it's just a lot. It takes a lot out of you. So at the same time, I'd kind of, like I said, I had put the pieces together of like, oh, I love books. I've been reading books my whole life. This is like what I do in my off time. I like looked at like my stacks of leisure paperbacks, stuff like that. I was like, I could try to do that. At the same time that like leisure was imploding and like publishing was in the toilet. But it all worked out, but like just through dent of like, I guess I'll write another book. Like I wrote 10 or 11 books before starting on Clown and Cornfield, and had pitched a number of agents, and like had, like it didn't, I don't know. It's one of those, like, it's a persistence thing, but it's also like a just blind luck thing too. Like, yeah, I'm very happy I get to do what I do.
I mean, we're all where we are to some degree by blind luck. I don't devalue that in the least bit. I mean, I got to where I am by knowing editors and putting myself in the right rooms, but it still is yet to be the right place, right time, all that stuff.
Oh yeah. It's like you talked to one person at one time and you made a decent impression, and that like changed your whole like life trajectory, which is like has happened to me a number of times. So it's like at a certain point you're just like, okay, very blessed, or that you start seeing the synchronicity in things. Even though I'm not that kind of guy, like
no, it's sliding doors, right?
Yeah.
Like train doors open on one side or the other side, and your whole life changes. Well, I want to ask, and my last question here is, the movie we're going to talk about today is somebody that is deeply, deeply unhappy about the path that his life has taken. Adam, I would say you're probably the opposite. So let's ask a big, what could be a softball question. You are writing books, you're writing comics, you're working on screenplays, you're sustaining yourself as a writer, you're not teaching anymore. You are officially making a living at the horror genre. And I'm kind of curious if now, kind of in the middle of this journey that you're doing, what your relationship to the genre is. If you feel like you get up and you're super excited to keep doing what you're doing, if you feel like maybe you've, this has become a job for you, because there's always that push-pull of like, do the thing you love and you'll never work. Is that true? Is that not true? How are you with horror today?
I'm so good with it. That's the thing. Like, and I think it's what's interesting is like, I've been doing the same kind of bits and focusing on the same stuff for so long and so much of my life that sometimes I do think I will like phase out of it. But then I'm like, well, it hasn't really happened yet. And you see a couple crappy movies in a row and you start to feel it. But then I keep bringing it up on podcasts because it's still so fresh in my mind. But it is the movie that everyone's talking about. But I'll have like a long legs experience, and I'll be like, what a beautiful, amazing thing that like recharged my batteries. Even though I don't write anything remotely really like that, I'm like I'm like definitely not trying to be like the Oz Perkins of like literary fiction, of like hard fiction. Like, but I look at it and I look at how good it is, and to me how idiosyncratic it is. Like that, like this idea of, I don't know. It just, like I said, recharge my batteries. Like, and that happens fairly regularly because I watch a lot of movies, and I just am able to find joy in it. And that's kind of that thing about like working in different formats. When I get on like podcasts and stuff like that, even though I've written a couple movies that have gotten made, and I have like a screenplay credit on them, I do almost purposefully distance myself from them, in the way that like I really do believe like Last Night at Terrace Lanes is Jamie Nash's movie, and Ghost Game is Jill Gizfarkian's movie. Like those are their movies, and I really like. I'm glad I learned. Like I'm glad for Cahiers du Cinema, at least for that, or like that I learned the auteur theory to be like, that's pure ownership, because I get to like at least separate myself, and it's something I worked on a little bit, and it's something I got to do as a fun little lark. But it's not my like my day job, if that makes sense. Yeah. Like my day job is writing books, and it lets me keep movies fun. I think if I tried, I think if I were like one of those guys taking like a lot of meetings and like just constantly like being like, oh, I gotta think of the next big movie idea, I think like that would be very hard. Like if you had Cargill on, I don't know how he would do it, because even with all his many successes, to me, to have to keep doing that, because I've done enough of it to know that I don't like it, and then to know that it makes me uncomfortable, and to know that like that's not the best use of my time is to get like on a Zoom that's gonna get bumped 6 times. Like I'm gonna have a Zoom date and then it's gonna get bumped a bunch of times. And it's like, oh, they got drawn into a meeting, and then to just like kind of try to sing for your supper, like do the the Tim Robbins and the player thing, like it just like that feels so hard to me. That feels like, so the idea of like if I had to sustain myself on movies would I would have I feel like not as sunny an answer, if that makes sense. But I have enough at distance because I'm a book guy. I get to just purely enjoy movies as not as tied into my job, but just as my avocation, not my vocation, if that makes sense. Like my avocation's always going to be horror because I have that distance. So I'm happy for it.
Well, I'm glad that you haven't killed everybody in the clown in a cornfield town yet. You've still got a few bodies left to drop before the series is done with you.
I worry about screamifying them and them becoming like Teflon. And then because you can't win, because then it's like, then you kill Dewey, and I'm like, oh, fuck those guys. Like, it's which is not their fault. It's like you had to do it, and it's like, but you really did have to do it, and it still bums me out because I like everything in that movie but that. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, you say that. Don't wish that on me. Like I'll kill a few of them because but I'll do it on my own terms.
All right, fair enough. Well, let's re-engage the avocation in you, Adam, and let's talk about Bruiser. Let's talk about a George Romero film that you brought on the show today. So we're gonna take a quick break, and when we come back, it's Romero time. It's Bruiser time. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Let's talk about Bruiser. We do talk about Bruiser. See, it's like a Disney joke. It's whatever. It's good.
Oh, we did. I think I like tweeted something similar, like, oh no, I made that like the subtitle to like a TikTok that I made about this, and I was like, I hated myself for it, but I also like I have a 2.5-year-old in the house, so I know we don't talk about Bruto is locked into my head. I've got Encanto, the whole thing. I could spin it up.
Well, you have a 2-year-old. I have no kids, and yet we get into the same joke. So I don't know. One of us is doing better than the other. I feel you have a more honest earn on it. But quick synopsis for those of you who have not seen Bruiser. Henry Creedlow's life sucks. On paper, he's the creative director of Bruiser, a popular men's magazine. But in real life, he has a wife who's unfaithful, a friend he can't trust, and a boss who thinks he's an idiot. But when Henry wakes up with a blank mask on his face, he realizes that he can finally live the life he's never had the courage to do. One of the more under-discussed films in George Romero's catalog, Bruiser sits alongside American Psycho as movies of 20th century masculinity and capitalism run amok. If you haven't seen the film and you want to check it out, it is available right now in a lot of places, but Plex, I believe, is the free streaming platform that I found it on. It might be on some of the others, but Plex doesn't cost you a dime. You just got to watch a few ads about healthcare, and you'll be good to go.
If you're a sick person like me that's got to like own everything, which is like, I know I will say the indicator disc for this is really, really nice. It's really beautiful. They did a 4K of it, and it's like, it looks awesome. It's British though, so you gotta import it from my boys at Diabolic DVD. So,
oh, there you go. You gotta have the region free and everything. That's
the great thing about 4K is it can be region locked, but no one's really done it yet.
Oh,
like,
okay.
I think 1 or 2 discs have come out that have been region locked, and everyone's like, not cool, man. Like, so yeah, they don't typically lock the discs on this.
Yeah, Meg Navarro told me that trick because I thought the same thing, and then she was featured. I forget which one it was, but again, she was featured on one of those Diabolique or whatever, and I was like, oh man, I really want to own it, but I don't have a region free. And she's like, oh no, 4K, you can. It's as long as it's 4K, you're good. And I was like, oh shit, and like it burst the door down. And I'm just like looking at all the 4Ks, like fuck,
yeah,
I can actually buy these.
It's tough. The thing that you got to be worried about, or you got to be careful of, is that a lot of them, they'll do like those nice multi-disc sets, and like the second disc where all the special features are will be a region B disc
Gotcha,
or a
yeah.
reasonably B Blu-ray. So you'll have just the nice movie, but you won't be able to see like the tantalizing, like the second sight, Dawn of the Dead, speaking of Romero, has like a million different, it has Document of the Dead and all this different stuff. But you can't, that one's region locked. So.
Well, it's been a good week for learning stuff. So 2 things you learned this week: 4Ks are not region locked, and James Cameron thinks the film grain is bullshit. Those are like the big key takeaways from this week.
Well, yeah, when he made everyone look like melted wax, I think we knew that he thought it was film grain.
There you go. He'll never come on the podcast. It's fine.
So I'm sorry to burn those bridges with James Cameron. It was such a dopey quote, and it's also like not one of those quotes you can really like backtrack, because he's like, everyone living in their mom's basement since I took the film grain away, and it's like, no, dude, that's like, this is like basic stuff. we want to see the movies the way they looked.
He's gonna cry into his $100 bills. He'll be just fine.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Bruiser. So, Adam, you told us the story. I think it was on the recording, and I can't even remember, about how you managed to find this one in just the right time. What was the inspo for pulling this one off the shelf? You bought the copy?
It's all just timing. It's timing. I don't usually like watch movies as soon as I get them. I like open them out of a big box and then put them in a big junk pile, because I'm like some kind of sick pack rat. Like I'll open up, buy a bunch of movies. But I got it. It came in from Diabolic. I just wanted to watch it. I threw it on, and then you emailed like the day after I watched it. And I was like, finally, perfect. Something that I can actually fit onto the Certified Forgotten podcast.
But this was you had seen it and
I've seen it before.
Purchase?
I've seen it.
Okay.
I've seen it. Like, I think it came out because it's an interesting movie production wise, because it's a Canadian movie, but it's a Studio Canal. So it's a French Canadian co-production, and not in Quebec terms, but like the country France, the country Canada coming together to give George Romero money like 10 years after he made The Dark Half, and he hadn't made a movie in a little while. But then I think there was a slight delay. So I don't know what year I'd actually sat down and watched Bruiser, but it was pretty close to when it came out. It was either 2000, 2001, or 2002. I don't know when it kind of made it across that divide of like film festivals, DVD, Blockbuster exclusive. I just remember this movie having such a foothold on like the Blockbuster shelves, both as a rental and then because they had too many copies, so like a lot of like previewed DVD bin things. It has a great cover. It has like the mask, but like with like 2 little blood cuts out of it. Looks very early 2000s, and I think the American Psycho is a good point of comparison. And I find it so interesting watching this film and knowing that American Psycho came out the same year, so they really are kind of like convergent evolution. They have a lot of similar, not just like plot similarities, but like aesthetic similarities. All this like kind of yuppie excess, new media type stuff, like elitism versus like general decency stuff. So I don't know where I was going with that, but
let's start here then. How does this hold up for you? Having not seen it in a long time, while rewatching it now, obviously you're excited to talk about it on the show. Is that because you think that this is a movie that is aged particularly well or poorly, and you still really like what it's doing? What was the rewatch for you?
I think it's aged really well, and I think it's a more personal thing, because I think when I saw it, I was young. I can't do math, but I think I was like 13, 14, whenever that was. And I think I was, Mr. Dawn of the Dead, Mr. Day of the Dead, Mr. Like the just knowing the main cuts of Romero, and then being like a new George Romero movie, maybe not having seen kind of the weirder stuff and like the stuff in the interim, just being like, oh, can't wait for this. And then kind of it being so not what I was thinking it was. And I think part of the reason maybe it's certified forgotten, and Matt had said before about how a lot of horror critics now are getting certified and are putting their backlist reviews up, is I feel like around when it came out, those same critics probably weren't even like, oh, this isn't on the horror beat, because it's not really a horror movie. I think there's a certain slipstream cross genre element to this movie where the horror is one of the cross genres, but I think it's maybe not even the dominant strain. I think it's like movies like Falling Down, maybe like crime movies, detective movies, because like Tom Atkins shows up as a detective that talks in like pure like gumshoe cliches. Like he talks like a like a 1950s like Columbo-esque detective, 1950s, 60s, 70s like TV detective, which is very interesting. It's just an odd writing choice and an odd performance choice. So I think there's a lot of surface level stuff that it's like when this came out, they were pitching it to Blockbuster as like a psychological thriller, or like they were never like, or a crime thriller. They were never using the H word, I'm sure, when they were selling this movie, even though it's a Romero film. So I think all of that on the personal front, probably I had these biases as a kid, and then watching it now as an adult, and as someone who is like now filled in all the spots in Romero's filmography that I hadn't before, and putting it in that context, I think I'm like, oh, this is a movie that I had maybe unfairly dismissed, that really is great. And I think part of that is just generally watching it. Like, I don't even, I bet it was a widescreen DVD, but it was still a DVD. It was still like, not HD. Like, I think it's like the fact that movies look generally worse now, especially lower budget, like, streaming stuff looks different and doesn't look as cinematic. So watching a movie that is lower budget, that has a real tactile cinematic flair to it. Don't tell James Cameron. But like the idea, like this like a movie that feels like a real movie, watching it, and it felt like such a rediscovery, where maybe when it was straight to video and when I was 12 watching it, I had maybe like knocked it off as like, oh, this is cheap. Now everything that was cheap looks more expensive, because even if it was just shot on film, like, it's still like a leap.
We were talking about that the last episode we had. We talked about Down and how that movie looks incredible now, and it was not anything special back in the day, but it was shot on film and they built sets, and like those two things alone make it look like the most expensive horror movie that might have come out in 2023, right? Like, it's just a night and day difference.
Yeah, I think there's really something to that, and I think I hate to be the guy that's like, things used to be better, but I also think when there's demonstrable like virtues to the things that you're complaining about, it's like, you know what I mean? Like I feel like you can still make the case. Like, yes, I do have a better chance of liking something that's shot on film. I do have a better chance of liking something because of numerous factors that made it so to produce that movie on film, you had to do X, Y, and Z, and you had to be careful about X, Y, and Z. And because of that, the whole product seems to be just generally raised.
Well, I mean, like, I just saw Borderlands, and I know that's a pretty bad example because it looks like utter garbage, but it looks like utter garbage in so many scenes because it's digital, and so much of it is shooting on that LED volume, let's say, that kind of technology.
Yeah.
And it looks pixelated, it looks fake, and you think back to when, hey, remember when people used to film movies? These sets exist somewhere. Like, if you just go shot and somewhere in the desert or something like that, like, obviously George Miller found places to shoot Mad Max films that look this dystopian. So I think that's pretty demonstrable, like you said right there.
And to prove I'm not a fuddy-duddy, I think what's interesting is they're all tools in the tool belt, and it's kind of how you use them. Like, Borderlands, a movie that is like notoriously troubled and had a bunch of reshoots and maybe had like writers trying to take their names off and have new directors come in. Like, that's a troubled production. But you look at something like, I remember watching the first few episodes of The Mandalorian and not like having seen like the behind the scenes, like not knowing what the volume was, and remember watching it and being like, the fuck, like, did they like, where did they shoot this? Like, what? Like I remember like being like tricked like by Jon Favreau's like thing that he did, like being like actually like, oh, well, like, and like I said, tool in a tool belt. But generally, when you have a shortcut to something, it means that you take shortcuts. Like, but if you use these tools properly, they can be mind-blowing and amazing. Like, I think the first season of that show looked incredible, and all those directors are great. And that I think that's the example is why is like they're all great directors, and they're using this new technology in a constructive way or in a novel way. So I just say that to prove that, like I said, I'm not a fuddy-duddy completely, but I do think there is something to this. Like, there is something to, if you had to go somewhere and you had to shoot a real thing, chances are it looks a little better.
And I love that's kind of the place to tie it back to Bruiser, right? There's an element.
Toronto is where you shoot.
Well, Toronto is definitely where you shoot, but there's definitely an element to this movie that is like, it's like you give anything time, odds are it's probably going to do better than and not better, just by the nature of like changing trades. And I think of like, Bruiser, again, like I said, I've seen it before. I got about halfway through my rewatch before I had to stop. So I'm not going to pretend. I'm going to let you two talk about the ending. Though I vaguely
The ending's the
remember it.
best part. Like the problem is like
You
the
guys are-
problem
you
is
guys- no,
like
you're good.
it's a really good, it's like a really fun, like I said, falling down American Psycho riff until you get to like the part with the Misfits in it, until you get to like the big party, and then you're like, holy shit, like this movie opens up like in such a big way. And then it has such a we're talking spoilers, but it has an ending that is not what you expect in this type of movie. Like this type of movie is almost pro forma. Like there's such a tradition of this kind of movie of like, we got to punish this guy. And the way it has such a kind of playful, almost hopeful ending, like almost set up for like a wacky sequel, like ending is so, I like it so much. And to me, that like last scene and a half, like really is what elevates the film to me. It's what makes me be like, oh, I want to talk about that on a podcast instead of like, oh, yeah, this is a fun curio for Romero completionists. I think that last act is really what makes it to me something more.
But even within, even talking about the just the general vibe of the movie, right? Like it's a very MTV style generation. Like Romero is playing with concepts that are sort of like the cable television vibe. There's a lot of like overclocked and like guitar riffs and stuff in the score, right? Like he's shooting something that I imagine to a lot of contemporary viewers felt so outside his wheelhouse, even though
it's like, what is this older guy trying to do here?
Is he trying to he's trying to prove that he's still got it by youthing up, even though the history of Romero is the history of him using like industrial or like commercial films, like it's all part of the cycle. But I want to talk to both of you a little bit and let you weigh in on, how you feel about the journey that the main character goes on, right? Henry's particular journey, and whether that reads to you now as like, we're all in our 30s, some of us are in our 40s, how this feels at a different point of life, and if this feels like a justified revenge story, if it feels a little twisted. Like I think that there's an ick factor to this movie a little bit that you got when you first watched it. And I don't know how that ick factor feels 20 years later, as we're all watching it now. So Adam, we'll start with you. Like, how do you feel about the story?
Go Matt first, because I want to. Yeah.
Let's let Donato weigh in on killing
totally.
everybody in your life that's wronged you.
Pro, obviously. No, I should explain a little more on that. Number one, I do want to go back very quickly. I will answer that, but like I do want to even go back further to say like I was so surprised watching this movie because obviously when I tune in for a George Romero film, I have a certain expectation. I had not seen Bruiser yet; that had escaped me, so this is a first time viewing. And in talking about how much I love the 2000s and how much they played by their own rules, like the dialogue is fucking hilarious in this movie. It's not even just, there's the scene with Stormare and fucking Atkins talking about cute chickies and getting Kentucky Fried, like A+, but the gumshoe aspect of even the score, it made it seem in a way that like I could never grasp what the tone was trying to go for. Like, should we even be on Jason Flemyng's side, the star who's playing Henry? Like, does the movie know what it's doing in a way where he is aware he's a villain, or is this some kind, did this get lost in translation where he's a hero? And I think, like, to answer your question, Mono, getting back to it, watching it now with the revenge arc and seeing all these things, I'm kind of into it. I am in the falling down way. Obviously that is a very easy comparison, and like any kind of that movie where someone has just pushed past their brink, they have been abused their whole life. And I think this particular level of sleaze and douchebaggery around him makes it okay, because everyone in his life are just caricatures of evil. Whether it's, the wife literally cheating in front of him so he sees it and so he'll react, or his boss Milos, that like the company
Peter
Bruiser,
Stormare,
right? Like, Peter Stormare's character, like the company Bruiser.
You don't need to describe the character. You just need to say.
No, but he
Peter
really
Stormare.
is. He's the most Peter Stormare like character in a way. He's so Romero didn't even seem to try to control him, which is an interesting. I think it's actually a good tactic. I think to especially in this movie. Like in a different movie, it probably wouldn't have worked, but Keep going, because I want to tag on everything you're saying.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, Bruiser itself, the company feels like it should be in Josie and the Pussycats. It's so satirical.
Yeah.
But in doing all of
Maxim
that,
magazine kind of.
yeah, exactly. It's Maxim to the 10th degree.
Yeah.
But in doing all that, I think Romero makes it a safe space for the character to have his revenge arc, because we don't have to worry about anyone in a moral gray area where he's killing someone who, is it yes, is it no, is it justified? This is purely cathartic revenge from a place of feeling absolutely miserable and being wronged. It's not one of those stories where a guy thinks he's being wronged and he goes on revenge. This is very much
demonstratable. It's not even really like that falling down of like, oh, well, is this guy like, racist? Like, there's none of that. There's no gray area. You don't have to worry about Jason Flemyng's, like, whether he's on the right side. And what's funny is, like, real early in the movie, before all this stuff, before you start revealing, it's pretty clear he's getting ripped off by the friend. Before you start revealing all this stuff, you do have that. Like, there's a little 10-minute grace period where you're like, this guy's like kind of so petulant. He's this, he's living in this big empty house to try to like keep his wife happy, but they don't even have enough money to like finish it. Like, half the walls are like, just like there's like a buzzsaw like in the kitchen where he's eating a cereal on like the table of the buzzsaw, because like they don't have enough money to finish the thing. Like, he's so clearly stuck in this rat race that you can't even enjoy the luxury things you have. Like, the luxury things you have are so compromised that they just suck. Like the luxury things you have, you reach so for the stars that you don't even have any luxury because you're living in like a construction zone. And I think that's like the most nuanced the movie gets. And then you start revealing what absolute monsters all the people around him are. Like, because he isn't like, we have no real paragon. He's not like this paragon of virtue or nice guy. We have nothing proving that to us, but just by relation, he's just like, well, he's great. Yeah, he's great compared to Peter Stormare, like who's like, who like takes his balls out in like a all hands meeting at the magazine. Like, it's like, he sucks. Like, there's no question here. And then you get to have that cake and eat it. And then what the movie doesn't do is that, like we said, that pro forma ending of like the cops catching up with him and taking him down. It's like, no, he just kind of gets away with it, and kind of gets the super happy ending in a way, which I really appreciate, and I think it's so different. And I think is when you look at Romero and not to too intellectualize it, but it is like a writer director piece. Like, he must be. You look at Romero's filmography and you look at all the Diamond Dead and the Resident Evil, all the movies he was like developing before he made this movie, all the movies like for like fucking 10 years he was like trying to make and could not get like one over the plate. He could not get these people to play ball and give him the money to make movies. Like, you look at that, and this isn't a wholly original thought. Like, Kim Newman talks about this on the disc, but I also think it's a valid point. Like, I think it's not even really like subtext. It's almost text. It's like put upon guy writing a story about being put upon. And then he's like, he's not even in his comfort zone of like Pittsburgh. It's like, it's so clearly Toronto, and it's so clearly like a new place. And it's almost like he's like taking the piss out of like just the style of like there's those aesthetic similarities to like nice suits and stuff like that of American Psycho and guys in finance who will rob you blind. I mean, he's getting robbed by his best friend, by like the thing that, the guy that he calls him like, oh, you're my best buddy. Like, he like gets really chummy with him, and when he's so clearly being robbed by this guy, and it's you can't help but see the autobiographical elements in it a little bit of Romero being the truest, bluest filmmaker in many ways, in many regards, like the truest independent, and just getting so burned and so tired of getting fucked over. Like that, like there's got to be a catharsis for him in even writing this. Like,
well, and I also see a little bit of the catharsis for Jason Flemyng playing a leading role, because I love him as an actor, but he always appears in an ensemble piece, Lock, Stock, Smoking Barrels, down the list. That's what we've seen him all. He's on the side. He's part of a team. He's part of something, or, henchman number 3, sub-villain number 2.
Yeah.
He never really gets to shine as much, obviously, by the
and he gets to put on an
2000s.
American accent here. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like it's that,
Yeah.
it's that, or North American accent, I
North
guess.
American.
But they do kind of try to hide. You know, it is one of those movies that's a Canadian movie that it's like, we're not gonna, you're not gonna see any maple flags waving. It's like
Right.
he's either in the Northeast or he's in Canada. You know, like so I think there is something to that, and I think it's like he's interesting casting because he becomes a Romero surrogate in that way too. Yeah.
Yeah, and the mask is really interesting
We
because
haven't even talked about this.
I was gonna say, how many movies have we all seen where the mask goes on and there's either no definition or it doesn't evolve. It's just what it is. It's a mask. But I love this idea of finding your identity through, in this case, Fleming's character finds his identity through murder and standing up for himself.
Yeah.
But the color, the changes he makes to it as he goes along, whether he's spreading like red on it or like, matting it so it looks like flesh. I just love the evolution and the way that the mask transforms with him as he gets.
And yet it's still the same. And yet it's a blank. And like,
right.
And yet it's a blank. It's that like almost so what I guess we're not even really talking about is there's a slight supernatural element to this movie in that he has like, it's in a way, it's like the Jim Carrey mask. It's like the mask.
Mm-hmm.
He gets halfway through or less than halfway through the movie, he gets a little white prosthetic mask that he can't take off. He tries shaving it off. It doesn't come off. And he just has this blank face, this blank expression that mirrors what his crush, Peter Stormare's wife, was trying to get him to fill out this mask as like an art piece and like, oh, fill it out. How does it reflect who you are as a person? So he gets this mask stuck to him, and you think it's gonna be this cheap metaphor. That's another thing that the movie does that's great, where like the ending, it subverts your expectations of like, you think you know where it's going. It's like, oh, well, cops are definitely gonna kill this guy in the end, and like the last shot's just gonna be him like lying, Sunset Boulevard style in like a pool or something. Like, but he gets the mask and you're like, oh, well, the mask, I've seen this Tales from the Crypt episode before. This guy's going crazy. He thinks he's got a mask on. And then and then you cut to like, just as soon as you're getting tired of like, is the mask real? Is it not real? You cut to Tom Atkins in the police station looking at closed circuit footage being like, he's got some kind of mask on, like, which is perfect. The mask is real. He really has it on. It's great. It's just such a playful, such a nice word. And I think it really does fit because even the villainy is like playful in this. Like you said, it's just so over the top. It's so ridiculous. Like,
well, and like
that. Yeah.
I was gonna say Flemyng plays the hell out of like the sassiness of it all. Like when he's interrogating Jimbo, and he's throwing tennis balls at him as he's playing, and like he's toying with people in a way that Jason Flemyng does very well, because he has this certain, just like the way he looks at you, the way he's kind of judging you with every sight. I love that. And then you get the evolution from very nice Jason in the beginning when he is getting walked all over by everybody to that I'm seeking revenge now. And he does that turn so well, very well.
It's almost like a superhero movie. It's like the same way you would play it if he got powers or something like that. Is this idea of like he's doing it for himself now. He's becoming this thing, and like you said, the joking of with his victims and the toying with his victims. I really enjoy the film, and it just does so many things that you don't expect it to do.
And you can't really, again, not to say I miss the way they make movies, not to say I wish the way things were done, but this does feel quintessentially 2000s. This fits right into that. I don't really know what genre it is. I don't really know half the time what they're going for, but I'm fucking entertained because that dog just turned a bandsaw on and almost killed its owner. Like, that's amazing. We
within the first 2 minutes of the movie,
right?
Yeah, within the 2 minutes of the movie is like almost like a early 90s like kids movie, like a Honey I Shrunk the Kids gag of like a trained chihuahua like hitting a bandsaw, like, which is great.
A giant red button, no less.
Yeah, just a big button that's in the middle of their like right by their door.
But like that
Chekhov's
again,
bandsaw for sure.
But again, that's it's a simple little, it's one little thing that happens, but I feel like that extrapolates through the whole movie, and again through the dialogue, just through the way that Tom Atkins alone, this detective, is talking, and there are such specific choices that elevate the movie above generacy, and I think that is a testament to veteran character actors just getting to play the hell out of their roles. Like, everyone is allowed to be maximal, like you just said. The Misfits showing up in that last party scene, like there's a whole warehouse rave setting basically for the second
they
half.
run through like 4 or 5 songs. It's not like they're in it for like a little bit. It's like, okay, here are the Misfits to play the to play the third act. Yeah.
And shout out to my friend Mike Partlow, who's the biggest Misfits fan I knew in high school, who's the reason I saw this movie, because he was like, "We gotta watch this movie. They got the Misfits everywhere." He was the only kid at Juneau Douglas High School that had a Misfits shirt. Now you can get them at Hot Topic. We're old. Please continue, Donato.
No, I was just gonna say everything just feels better and bigger. And if we're thinking about movies that felt like movies, this feels like a fucking movie. There's everything's on a set. Everything is somewhere. Like fucking Stormare's hanging from the ceiling, and that's how he gets off with a heat laser.
With a laser, a laser. He kills it with a laser. What's interesting about this film is that tonal mix and how you can still take some parts of it really seriously, and you can still have that ickiness. It's just like, it's not like I can't see them making this today. I very much can see them making this today, but that tone would be consistent. That tone would be, you would smear that out through it, and it would become like, for lack of a better example, I'd liken this to something like Megan. And I know that seems like a weird jump, but like I think of Megan has that. Megan feels built. This isn't even a value judgment. This isn't even like I like Megan, and there's large parts of Megan I appreciate, but overall it feels like a movie built to get people on Twitter to say it's bonkers. Does that make sense? We know we want a certain amount of like pull quotes, and we're going to engineer something to get us to that. And Romero wasn't thinking that. And it's just pure dent of the time that it was made in. It gets to be a little bit more idiosyncratic. It gets to be a little bit more handmade and a little bit more one vision, instead of the same level of engagement, the same like guffaws and the same almost thrill ride aspect of like enjoying yourself, but coming from a less processed, or a less maybe not market tested or focus tested. Maybe that is the word I'm talking about, but like that idea, like that idea of like we want to do camp again. And I think there are films that, and there's definitely times that I want to be able to use that term. Like I think the Chucky TV show is a really good example of like of embracing the word camp and enjoy it. But there is that like what's great, what feels freeing about this film is that it's unexpected, and it doesn't feel like it's coming from a place of we're only going to do this one thing. It has all these different little aspects in it. And now I think when you get a film like this, you just get peanut butter. You don't get that cool peanut butter that the other kids got that has a little bit of the jelly mixed in. You don't get the ribbons effect. You just get peanut butter, and peanut butter is great, but sometimes you want the ribbon. This metaphor is awful.
It's perfect.
No, I get it.
Like peanut butter, it's just as sweaty as it needs to be.
I was gonna say, I don't think George Romero cared whether he was making a film noir, a slasher, a sleazy midnighter, a comedy. None of that mattered, because he was focused on telling the story. Where what you said, if this was made today, I feel like you pick one of those lanes and it's just manufactured at that point. It just goes A to B. We know the factory presets for this, and that's what comes out at the end. So it's just how I look at 2000s movies, and how I look at a lot of those just wild swings that studios were taking. And I hate saying they don't make them like they used to, but watching down on our last episode, watching this one, like it's like, they don't fucking make those movies anymore.
Yeah. And there's good and bad to that. There's certain things you revisit from this era, and it's funny because it's usually the bigger movies that you revisit from this era, the things that did well and that became a little bit of cultural hallmarks that don't tend to hold up as well, or at least for me they don't. And I think it's that mix. You have an older guy who this isn't his normal bag, doing younger person shtick a little bit. Maybe to get it made, and it's that great question of like, you watch it and you'll never know intent, and you just know final product. It's like, well, is this, because Jason Flemyng talks about that. They talk to him on the Indicator DVD or DVD. I'm like 2 formats behind the 4K. And I thought it was such a nice discussion, because it's really quick. It was like 10 minutes, but it's like he's really warm towards Romero. He like does a Romero impression. It's funny to hear like a British guy like do a Romero impression, but he also seems to think like it's not so much one of those, like you see a lot of interviews on like discs for like retrospective like 80s movies where it's clear that the actors like don't really like it, or like didn't like it. Seems like he likes it, he feels conflicted about his performance in it, but he liked Romero so much, and he kind of got what was going on and what he was trying to do. I had like a thing that I was gonna pull out of that he had talked about, but this idea of like he felt that it was compromised. He was like, I feel like George didn't get what he was wanting to do. Like the producers were on set and were whispering in his ear and were asking for alternate takes and stuff like that, and he saw it as a compromised vision. So, but when I only knowing that afterwards, watching it twice and being like, no, this feels bespoke. This feels like someone's vision. It feels like and it's maybe it's a little of column A, maybe it's a little bit of column B, but we can only really look at the end product, and the end product is, I think, great. So,
well, that brings us to our last question. And Adam, we're going to start with you. We always ask our guests, we always have a little conversation at the end about how this film connects with the audience that it deserves. Now, obviously, this is a George Romero movie, so there are going to be people that will seek it out just on the merit of it being a George Romero movie. But let's say you're not a George Romero person, right? Like, let's say this is the 2000s horror equivalent of you walking by a bookshelf and seeing Clown on a Cornfield, walking by a VHS shelf and seeing something else. What makes this appealing to a new generation of horror fans that maybe aren't as interested or aren't as respectful of just the name pedigree that comes with the movie?
Matt, you want to take it or no? Because I don't even know. Like, that's the thing. I can't divorce this from the like Romero filmography. I kind of only watch it in that context. So it's really hard for me to say. Like, I think there's probably that slight, because it's 25 years ago now, there probably is that slight aesthetic pleasure of just it being a 2000s movie, like of it being a year 2000, like, oh, it feels of a time, and it very, very much does. It does feel, I don't like the term dated. Dated just means you can see when something's made. Like dating, like we want to be able to date things. We want to know, like, dated to me is not a pejorative. Like, it does feel dated in a good way for me. It feels this if you want to see what movies were like that, especially movies of a certain kind, movie like $3 million movies put together in Canada because you spent years trying to get studio movies made. Like, it is like, you could almost feel that. Like, of course we know that context, and if you didn't know that context, I still think you would have that pleasure of, oh, this is so different. Oh, look at the misfits, they're jumping around. Like, oh, like this, look how big this party is at the end. You'd never get that many, like, you'd never get that many people COVID swabbed to stand next to each other, like, like in a party scene now. Like, there's something about that. There's something about that being very enjoyable, and there's something about, you've seen, even if this is a first journey into this kind of this kind of genre picture, you've probably seen movies like this before, because you've seen this good guy goes AWOL type of movie, and you're expecting one thing, and it subverts it. Even if it gently subverts it, it subverts it.
Yeah, I think, again, it is hard, because when you have a filmmaker on the status of Romero, it's impossible not to consider his entire filmography, because that's what we do. Like, this, the name alone he's the grandmaster of zombies. Like, it's hard not to think about that when you think about Romero. And I think that's what makes me more interested in a movie like Bruiser, because, like, if you look at his filmography, this is the last movie he made that wasn't an Of the Dead movie before his passing. Like, this is,
that does make sense. Yeah,
he did
true.
Bruiser.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah.
And he goes,
and
right
then
back
it was like Land Diary Survival. Yeah.
Bingo.
Yeah.
So I feel like I see a lot of a filmmaker who wanted to do all the things he hasn't gotten to do yet.
And he got to do them all in one movie.
Exactly. Like, how do I? And maybe that's because he knew. I mean, maybe he makes a movie this cynical in a way because, once again, he knew the rest of his career was probably just going to be Of the Dead movies, because that's all he could get made. Like you said before, all the projects he couldn't get happening. And I mean, one of those is a Resident Evil movie. That's why would you not have George Romero direct a Resident Evil movie? Makes sense to me, right? Yeah. But he couldn't even get that made. So I look at it in that sense, and in trying to get it to a bigger audience, whatever you want to say, I think if you position it from the sense of, like, listen, I know you all know Mr. Romero as the Of the Dead guy, literally the top of that genre, but he also did other shit, and he also did some weird shit too. Like, you want to go see where he was experimenting, you want to go see the stuff that wasn't experimental zombie work. Here's this little Bruiser over here. And I think there is there's an interesting connection between movies like Mute Witness and Bruiser and all these other very slashery, but also they're not slashers at all, and the way they play with different whodunit aspects, but then they're also not a whodunit because we know this is from Jason Flemyng's perspective. There is a lot of abandon in these films, and I think that is the connective tissue between a lot of 90s and 2000s movies that could play together really nicely. So you just do something where I always try to think of, what would you pair it with? How would you show this to people? What would you do? And I don't know, something like Mute Witness and something like Bruiser, I think could play together really nicely. And you intro one, you get to the other. But yeah, I don't know, the way these movies exist and the way they Bruiser specifically sits in that catalog, it's hard not to see it as a little Romero curio. And I think that's the best way to position it.
It's now I'm thinking of like double features, or like, because we have Exhumed Films here in Philadelphia. It's like someone, because they just did at the Mahoning Drive-In, they did night, dawn, day, because it's a drive-in, so you can only do it at night. So they split it between 2 nights. It was like Friday was night, dawn, day, Saturday was land, diary, survival. So like what they should do is There's Always Vanilla, Season of the Witch, Martin, Night Riders, Bruiser. Like they should show all the that would be the one to go to for me. Like that would be the cool, you probably know, like maybe you don't know Survival like the back of your hand, but you probably know Day and Dawn and Night like the back of your hand. Like go watch the odd number, go watch the ones that weren't the zombie movies to get a fuller picture of who this guy was, and he's this rogue industrial film marketing guy who hates market. Look at Bruiser, who fucking hates like marketing and print media, or like the world surrounding that. It's just so interesting. It's interesting out of the context, like we're positing, like this idea of if you only watch Bruiser, and then it's way more interesting in the context and in the continuum of a guy who was constantly trying to do things that weren't the one thing everyone wanted him to do. Mm-hmm. And even me, I love those movies incredibly dearly. I'd say Diary's really the only one I don't like. But it's also like if you look at his entire filmography, Diary's the only one I don't like. Yeah, I like Monkey Shines. I like Dark. I like when he gets on a Stephen King kick. It's just an interesting guy, an interesting filmmaker, and I think this is a proof positive that he's interesting, and it's maybe his least seen film.
Yeah, or even better than showing all of Romero's of the Dead films at a drive-in. Do a Masters of Horror, but don't show any of the movies that made them the Master of Horror. Like show their one oddball. The one. I think that's literally go down. That would be great.
That's actually that's a really good idea. We should talk to Exhumed, because they do these kinds of things all the time. That's what you should do. You should do
the certified forgotten Masters of Horror.
Yeah, like Stuart Gordon's like do King of the Ants.
Yep.
And then do or Stuck, and then you look at you look at all these guys.
Carpenter, go to Craven. They've all got theirs.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, you do Diaries of the Invisible Man.
That's just mean. We can't fuck with
you undo the whole thing by putting Diaries of the Invisible Man in the middle, and everyone gets upset.
Everybody walks out, and that's when you
everyone's like, put the thing back on.
Yeah, that's when you play the thing. You play half of Memoirs of an Invisible Man.
No, you play Starman, and that would be perfect. That's the one you play from Carpenter. Yeah.
All right, well, that is our episode on Bruiser. Like we said, it is available on Plex, which is the free streaming service of the moment, and it's available for rental in all the normal places. Adam, it was so good to have you on the show. Normally we say, do you have anything you want to promote? I'm going to say more specifically, when does Church of Friendo come out, and where can people go to purchase it and technically still pre-order it?
If this is going up within the next week, because it comes out August 20th is Clown in the Cornfield 3, The Church of Friendo. Barnes & Noble and Books A Million break their street dates like it's their job, so you could probably just go get it now, because it's on all the, I guess it's on all the shelves. I'm not super in love with that idea, because I think pre-order people should kind of get first crack at it. Wherever you buy books, the one thing I'll say is, been talking about horror movies and been talking about horror stuff. People always tell me, I can't find Clown in the Cornfield. My store doesn't have it. And they're never looking in the young adult section. It's not in the horror section. It's not in the adult horror section. It's in the young adult section. So you got to go over there. I almost guarantee that your store has them, but they just have them stocked with with the Five Nights at Freddy's tie-in books, because I'm like right next to that guy's name. He's like Cawthorn, and then I'm like Caesar. I'm like right next to him, which is great because you have all the reluctant reader teen boys that are going over there to see. But it's bad in some ways because I've gone into so many Barnes and Nobles to sign, and they were like, "Oh, so you wrote the Five Nights at Freddy's?" But I'm like, I didn't know. I wish I did.
And if people want to get, because I know that your local bookstore, will carry signed copies or at least bookplate copies for you. So
no, they're signed. They're. I go to what I do. This is a great thing that they do. I was literally just, as we were talking there, I was there from 10:30 a.m. to 5:00 p.m. signing pre-ordered copies. My local bookstore is a children's bookstore. Like, they have a big wood cutout of Babar like outside the thing. So it's like I walk in there and I sign my very, very violent slasher books, and then they mail them out. They ship within the U.S. If you're within the U.S., it's all on my website, adamcesare.com. I have links on all my socials. But they're Children's Book World, and all my young adult books. So Influencer as well, all the clown books, Dead Mall, which is a graphic novel that I did with David Stahl and Justin Birch, out through Dark Horse. They ship signed copies. So I just go in once a week. They have like 2 or 3 books for me to sign them, draw little clown faces in them for people, and then people can get signed books. It's super beneficial because I'm supporting an indie bookstore. They're doing the the mail out for me, which is like the hardest part, and people can get signed and personalized books from me. So yeah, that's kind of the best way to buy it. Otherwise, just buy it at your local indie. Ask them to take it in, or your library. Libraries work too. I always forget to say that because I think it's just as helpful to me, because a lot of libraries don't have them. So if you ask your local librarian, they order it in, and I get paid. It's great. Everyone gets to read it for free.
Read it for the first time at the library, and then when you like it, buy a copy for yourself. There we go.
There we go. Matt's got it.
Donato, you don't have a book about a murderous clown cult coming out anytime soon, but where do people go to find your film writing?
You can find me, as always, at Donatobomb, DONATOBOMB, on Twitter, Letterboxd, Instagram, also TikTok and Blue Sky a little more, but still not my favorite places to post.
I didn't know you were on TikTok. I'm gonna go. You got one new follow, buddy.
I know. Hey, that is fine with me. You're gonna see my random concert footage upload for now. We're
awesome.
still figuring out TikTok. We're still.
It's so fun. It's so fun. I actually really like it. I'm like the only positive TikToker.
You might inspire me to actually start using my following. Let's say all 150 followers. In any case,
151, buddy. Like I said.
Hell yeah. In any case, you will read things like, by the time this publishes on Friday, whatever date is this Friday, my Romulus review will be out. So I cannot say anything until then. So go read my Romulus review on Daily Dead.
Oh my gosh. I forgot it was Alien Week for a second. As for myself, you can follow me I'm on the Blue Sky. Blue Sky is my drug of choice these days because it's a very friendly drug of choice. Monocle at the Blue Sky chart string. I'm on TikTok. I've literally never posted a video. I just watch. I'm like, Peter, what's his face in that movie? I just like to watch. So that was a great reference, completely fumbled by my inability to remember names anymore. But yes, if you liked what you heard today too, sign up for our free Patreon tiers. You'll get our weekly newsletter, which hasn't been weekly for the last 2 weeks because I've been traveling, but I swear to God it's weekly. You'll also be able to help support by reading and by sharing our incredible authors on our website, certifiedforgotten.com. We've got a lot of really cool horror film criticism that happens. A lot of it is geared towards those types of 2000s movies we talked about today. Probably should commission a piece on Bruiser. I'm just saying that would be a good idea. But yes, if you like what you heard today, follow, like, subscribe, leave a review, leave a comment. All that good stuff helps. It's free. It moves things along. We're all just, Adam's an author. We're podcasters. We're all just out here being like, please, God, someone pay attention. That's it. That's the nicest thing you can do is pay attention.
And it feels really good. Like when you get a little bit of even like a little bit of feedback, a little review, something like that. It just brightens things up. When you see the number go up, it's nice. So make everyone's day and do that. Yeah.
I've embraced that myself. I'm now the weird guy that like Alex Grecian on Blue Sky talks about Red Rabbit, which is like one of my favorite books ever. And I just like every time he posts, I'm like, I love Red Rabbit. And I'm like, is this creepy or weird? I'm like, who cares? It's 24.
No,
this guy's just happy he's got
it's
one
engagement.
person.
It's happy. Yeah.
He's just thrilled that somebody's out there reading it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it for us. We'll be back next week with an uncertified episode. It'll be just myself and Donato. And spoiler alert, are we going to talk about Romulus? We're probably going to talk about Romulus, right?
We're probably going to talk about Romulus.
It'll be good stuff. But that's it. Donato, take us out if you will, sir.
Everything's going good.